Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for EDTA's Leader Series Member Showcase. Today, we are pleased to feature Baker Tilly to share insights on what the transition to e-mobility means for the automotive industry ecosystem. To lead the discussion, we have Peter Pearce, Principal and leader of the Mobility and Transportation practice, and Erich Bergen, Practice Director in the Mobility and Transportation practice. They will be providing their analysis of changing technology, business imperatives, and consumer behaviors, and what that means for the industry supply chain. Throughout the presentation, all of the attendees will be on mute, but at the end, we'll have time for Q&A, and you can post your questions in the chat. So again, thank you all for joining us for what was sure to be a very informative and enlightening discussion. And right now, I'm going to turn this over to Peter and to Erich. Thanks. Guys ready?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Genevieve. My apologies. I was on the infamous Zoom mute. So welcome everyone to our presentation today for the EDTA Electric Drive Transportation Association. My name is Peter Pearce, and I'm joined here by my colleague, Erich Bergen. And today we're going to cover really a macro element of what's happening in electrification around the industry, and then drilling down into the specific impacts for the modern automotive supplier and what that means, and some thoughts and actions and forces that you're going to want to look at as an enterprise. And then we'll talk about some takeaways that's going to be important to your business. And as Genevieve mentioned, my name is Peter Pearce. I lead the mobility and transportation area of Baker Tilly, as well as Erich Bergen, practice director in our business. So again, thank you for, and we have the pleasure to present today. Erich?
Yep, thanks. Just to add on to that, looking forward to today, and we've got some really good material to go through. And just by way of background, I'm 20 years in the automotive space, worked a lot with suppliers as well as across a number of the automotive OEMs, and have been heavily focused around customer experience, user experience, and then have also moved heavily into the supply chain space.
I wasn't going to go over the number of years. I was just going to point to the gray hair, so that should be sufficient there.
Okay, so for those that don't know who Baker Tilly is, so we were founded in 1931. We've got roughly 4,600 team members. Ranked 12th largest accounting firm. Like the Big Four, we go to market around tax advisory and consulting services. Roughly $4 billion in global revenue. Our firm has had a culture of growth over the last several years, and specifically through acquisition, have moved from a regional firm into a global firm, driving our revenues way up. And as such, we've expanded into lots of different areas that we're going to cover some. We're going to cover some of the capabilities that we do have throughout the day, but they're not really. It's not really meant to sort of educate on what we do. We just wanted to give a level set here about the firm, and that we're very similar. We've been in this business for a long time. We've got a very deep mobility and transportation practice, which is where, as I mentioned, Peter and I represent. Here's a listing of some of the things that we do from a mobility and transportation perspective. If you think of helping our clients within the automotive supplier base, as well as just in general the entire automotive ecosystem, we're heavily involved in anywhere from sort of management and strategy type consulting. So think of strategic planning, product strategy, supply chain strategy, those sorts of things, and then really technology and technology transformation. So everything from the shop floor on through throughout the organization. So we do heavy systems integration work. We do a lot of Industry 4.0 type movement and work around that. And then very, with our accounting heritage, right? We are also heavily involved in and you'll hear more here shortly, just around credits and incentives, around R&D, and just as the whole economy is moving to, and the government is investing dollars into, the new mobility and transportation industry. We are heavily focused in on helping make sure that our clients can get access to any government funding and those sorts of things to help accelerate their efforts within electrification. And so here's our first polling question to the group. Do you own an electric vehicle?
And you should have a dialogue. And if you're seeing multiple questions, I'll just focus on the first question on that list there. Let me know if we got all the results in. Okay. It looks like we have to we'll hold those questions. If you can hold that dialogue or move that dialogue box to the side. So it looks like you're going to have to answer them all as we go along, and then we can revisit them at the end once we submit them all. So go ahead, Erich.
Okay, the evolving industry. So let's just dive into the content here. So, I think, everybody in the news in the last, especially in the last year, has really been inundated with a lot of just press, a lot of news around electrification. Now, it's been around for a number of years, but just really recently, we've started to see this just mass increase. Now, we've seen this increase globally, right, in other markets like China, Germany, France, UK, and those sorts. And you'll see some of these growth projections here that have just happened here in the last year or so. But what we have seen is just a really nice, steady, foundation or platform that's being laid in the US. And that's really, we're going to go through the factors that are driving that shift in the US and what we can do about it, right? What can we do if you're part of the automotive supply chain from a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, or if you're battery, or if you're any of the surrounding businesses? How can you evolve your business in order to better integrate and work with this movement towards electrification? Because it is happening, and as we move forward in the coming years, we're going to start to see this shift. And so, historically, I'd say up until the last 18 months, there's been this view that electric vehicles are going to really create this paradigm with ICE vehicles somewhere in and around 2038-ish, where you'll start to see the same number of vehicles, from an ICE perspective and electric vehicle perspective on the road. And we actually, our data analysis shows that red arrow represents that this is moving to the left, and that we're actually going to see that adaptation move quicker. We're going to see more with vehicle pricing coming down, and we're going to get into some of these attributes here on the right. These themes that we're seeing are really centered around these key areas that are supporting and impacting the move from internal combustion engine into electrification. So themes around the consumer. What are the OEMs doing? How are they placing their bets? Government influence. I mentioned that a few minutes ago, just around massive amounts of dollars being poured into the space. What are the environmental impacts? New entrants. We see a number of new players coming in with new products that quite honestly look great. You've got new design, you've got new brands entering the market, and then last is the technology. So technology has a lot of underpinnings within. When you think about electrification, it's in-car technology, it's safety, it's battery life, which is one of the biggest drivers, which is just helping to put consumers at ease in terms of maybe I will buy a electric vehicle now that we have a good battery range. And so those are kind of the considerations. And so we're going to unpack these here today for everybody, and we'll kind of go through each one of these. And so consumers.
Erich, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to, if we can go back to that last slide, I wanted to call something out as well. We use the term ICE loosely, right? And that's internal combustion engine. If when we refer to that, gasoline-based engines. and then the EV for electrification. But I also wanted to point out that when we were looking at this industry, because this is something that we've been working on, obviously pre-pandemic, and we saw this curve going out there. It was at one point it was like 2050, but we've seen substantial growth where this parity of ICE and EV. We truly believe it's going to be pulled in, as Erich pulled out, for a number of reasons. But we wanted to, as we go through this presentation, we want to kind of call out that there's been some dramatic change during the pandemic that we want to talk a bit about as we walk through here. But just wanted to highlight whenever you see ICE, internal combustion engine.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And so as we begin to work around the wheel here around consumer change, right? So pricing, style, and design are becoming more in alignment. So I think about my own sort of perspective as well as my network. Pricing around electric vehicles historically has been what I would call sort of out of reach until the recent years, where you've started in the last year and a half to 2 years, where you've actually started to see some models come out that were in reach for folks that, young professionals or those that are trying to enter the EV space, where they could actually afford those vehicles. The style and design looks great, right? There's more and more data that's coming out around the total cost of ownership, meaning what does it cost to run my vehicle long term? And you can see that from an EV perspective, there's considerable savings over time. And those are all these new factors that you're starting to see come to light through research and publications. And it's really influencing the consumer's mindset. And you're also going to see this notion around consumers seeking to control more over the ownership or buying process. And I think having more and more co-creation or input into design, input into the shopping or how I buy vehicles is going to change as well. We're starting to see that with the Teslas in the shopping mall and things of that nature. There's just going to be this continued just movement, largely driven by just cultural changes, but then also just things around, everyone's on their smartphones. We have more informed consumers, more real access to information. We want to point and click and buy things. We are not, we don't really, enjoy the dealership experience. We want true price, real time. These are factors that are all kind of converging pretty quickly here in the last year or two.
And some points, regarding AAA, saying that 40 million Americans say they will at least consider, the procurement of an electric vehicle of some sorts as their next car.
Right, which is just a big number when you think about it. I think about that in my own. We all apply our own lens to this and say, well, am I one of those 40 million? Right? It's something to think about. OEM commitment. So, a couple of slides ago, I pointed out how in Europe we see this big increase in adaptation in Europe, and that's driven a lot of factors. But one of the factors is just the car manufacturers that are in Europe are producing these products that are deploying them in the marketplace. They're successful now. Oftentimes, there's country regulations that are helping to support that, which we're now starting to see in the U.S. and investment dollars. But you're starting to see those products on the road more and more. They're affordable, and so what are the domestic OEMs doing? And so we'll touch on we'll just touch on Ford and GM here just for the sake of the presentation. But recently, right, Ford invested $29 billion in EV and autonomous through the next few years here. General Motors investing in 30 new EV globally. Just massive commitments, 2035 inclusive of all electric vehicles. Now, some of those are aspirational targets in terms of timing, but I bet you they're going to be pretty close just based on based on the data we're seeing. That 2035 number again represents a leftward movement of the original data set that we presented, which had it more like 2038 and stuff. So again, just more and more. And I think as this, as the domestic OEMs continue to pump cash into this and get government support, they're able to move quicker. And there's a lot of focus on one of the unique advantages, nationally, I guess in the U.S. market, is the distribution and dealership network in order to, sell and move out vehicles as needed. Until that ownership or buying experience really changes in the US, you're still going to need to rely on dealerships and what does that dealership of the future look like in that buying experience of the future. So there's lots of dollars and investments going into how we buy vehicles today and how that's going to change in the future.
In late April, GM announced that they were going to be building a battery cell plant, manufacturing plant in Springfield, Tennessee, with a JV with LG Chem. So, $2.3 billion investment. So, and these are, we're seeing, essentially daily feeds on economic activities specifically focused around EV. And, point of clarification, when we look at GM, GM is planning to release 30 new platforms by 2025 that are on EV, that are EV platforms. I mean, that's substantial. That's a market changing move by these leading OEMs.
I mentioned earlier around government, what local governments do in Europe to help accelerate the rollout of electrification. We're starting to see that more and more in the U.S. as well. Anywhere from proposals to provide substantial buying incentives for us as consumers to buy electric vehicles, but you're also starting to see this just really rapid shift to investment in local infrastructures. Local municipalities are getting funded in order to put up EV stations. We're gonna unpack the commitment that just came out from the Biden administration here. But I can just take this one, Peter. So in Biden's administration, launched that they're going to propose 174 billion in investments just as part of the EV market. And so how does that really translate? Well, so as part of the 2 trillion infrastructure package that was just proposed by Biden, 174 billion of that is really going to be allocated to this EV space. And so that's a pretty significant chunk of dollars. And that 2 trillion is changing as well as it's going up, as more news comes out. But that really comes out to supporting 500,000 new charging stations, increasing 5G availability and internet access, just massive amounts of dollars being allocated, roughly 30% of this business to transportation infrastructure, which is huge. And that's going to lay that foundation for everybody in the automotive ecosystem to really get that leg up and start to move. And that would include suppliers, manufacturers, battery makers, any technology that goes in the car, sensors. There's going to be this just massive, and this is what we're seeing as you look at the news in the last year, is just this massive amount of just activity. It's just a flurry of activity going on, and it's really, really an exciting time to be in the industry. Environmental piece. This has been a theme for a long time, and I think one of the things that the data shows is the manufacturing process of internal combustion engines and EVs produce a similar negative impact to carbon emissions. So, let's drill into that. So really what we're saying here is we're not going to see the benefit from an environmental perspective until we have more EVs on the road. So it's about miles driven or cars on the road. So as you think about how are we going to tackle this? Well, we're going to tackle it by getting more and more EVs on the road and less ICE in the road. So that's what we're, you back that up and you say, okay, then OEMs are going to make less of one and more of the other. And then that's going to hit the consumers over the course of, 3-5 years as they continue to increase, and we'll see that adaptation rate go up. And I think, these activities all support the, this shift in certain environments or certain states, if you will, that are more advanced as it relates to green activities and the development of smart cities and building infrastructures in local municipalities and providing dollars in local states to accelerate infrastructure build out. I mean, there's certain states, and cities, Austin, for example, that just has a lot of activity that is really centered around going green, around being part of this movement. And I think that's going to take on even more across the US, and then you'll see more and more investment going into those areas.
And just want to add, as we as you look at it, it's really the longer term play that the electric vehicle has a better economic impact on the environment as miles are driven, right? So the more it's driven, the less carbon footprint, the less of a carbon footprint impact. Now, one thing that's also very important to call out is that the vehicles, by definition, are going to last longer, right? And are going to be able to be enhanced through, a new powertrain, a new skateboard that powers the vehicle. So we're also, seeing that, you have maybe a 10-year use of a vehicle, of a nice vehicle. We're going to see 15, 20 years use of these other vehicles, not for one consumer. We view that the resale market of these vehicles, right? Just like today, you have your iPhone. You're in a certain generation, but people are still buying the second generation, third generation of iPhones, right? Because they're purposeful, they have use. So we're going to continue to see like this ecosystem of reuse, and it's just only going to enhance and help the environment as we move forward.
That's right. New entrants, a lot of new products, a lot of new players coming into market, whether it's the Lucids or Rivians of the world. There's new products that look great. They're innovative, they're tech heavy, they have fast powertrain, right? So they're fun to drive, and there's more and more of them being deployed. And if you think about just in April alone, right, there's 71 EV startups globally. And so more and more of these EV startups that are running, there's a lot in China, right? There's 20 or 30 in China. I think you'll start to see that consolidation happen, and you'll see some products start to be positioned in the US market. We continue to see that. If you look on the news, you'll see more and more of these players coming to the US. And I think that creates competition. It creates options for consumers like us to buy. It drives the price down, potentially. And so I think there's a lot of factors that everybody is racing towards capturing this new market share of buyer. And I think that is happening a lot quicker than what people originally thought. And it's been accelerated through a number of these factors that we've kind of gone through here on this wheel. And I think, it's just another thing to keep light of. And, Peter, do you want to take this last point here?
Yeah, sure. It was interesting. We talked about this on a podcast years ago, about, as soon as Apple comes out with a car, game changer, right? Because there's a certain group of buyers out there that are going to look. I mean, they're focused on Apple products, and the Apple vehicle is going to be very appealing. Well, guess what? There's a memorandum of understanding that's been signed by Magna International and LG in April to build the Apple car, right? So there's activity happening here. So shortly we're going to see entrants like this, the Apple vehicle, come into play. So that's just going to be disruptive in itself, and that's essentially a new mini economy that will need support, because as we know, there's all different things that go with an Apple iPhone. There's going to be all certain components, or all net new components that are going to go with the Apple vehicle, right? So that's an area to focus as well, to support as we move forward.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And technology. This is one that is changing daily, whether it's in our everyday lives, whether from our iPhones or just the things that we use. But when we look at the vehicle, let's just focus on battery life, right? I mean, battery life, 5 years ago was drastically different than it is today. One of the number one things that prevented consumers to adapt EV was around range anxiety. Hey, I'm not going to be able to go anywhere, like I used to on a tank of gas. And now you're starting to see with charging stations come up with longer range. You're starting to see that mind shifts, change a little bit and say, well, okay, well, that's not really that bad. I know that 200 miles away there's a station, and I'm going to go up north. We live in Michigan, so we're up north Michigan for the weekend. I can hit 200 miles out. I can get a charge, and 200 miles back and get a charge. And so those are real options. Those are real considerations that are changing. I think infotainment, in-car connectivity, the ability to integrate and customize features and functions within your vehicles, those continue to get improved upon every day. autonomous technology that gets deployed. This is really neat in terms of driver assist type functions where you're driving and you've got emergency braking that comes on, or you've got turn signal lights, automotive cruise, auto cruise control, and auto braking that's being deployed. I mean, that's in that's some level of autonomous right now, and that's in vehicles today, right? I mean, my parents have a vehicle that just has that, and they're trying to figure out that, as they set the cruise control, it slows down on them and things of that nature. So there's just things like that, right? Blind spot detection, wireless charging, all these features are really just predicated on this massive influx of technology advancement.
Yeah. So when we talked about autonomous vehicles pre-pandemic, it was it was definitely clearly on the horizon, right? Now we're going to see, a big shift to autonomous, and for a number of reasons. We've proven that people, when you go now to pick up groceries, or you go to Target or whatnot, obviously for health and safety, we're doing those, the remote pickups where you come in and park, and they'll deliver your goods to your vehicle. But now that's a convenience factor, in my mind. If I don't have to spend hours in Target, I can just pick something up and hit the road. That's a convenience factor. But now we're even seeing, what if Target in their fleet of autonomous vehicles, because there's always a Target within a certain number of miles from your home, or Kroger within a certain miles of your home, they're going to have a fleet. They're looking at having fleets of autonomous vehicles that will deliver, in your local community, bring your goods, your groceries, whatnot, to your doorstep. That is going to be, due to the pandemic, we estimate that's probably taken 3 to 5 years off that reality of happening, right? So we're going to see a lot more, and we're working with clients in this autonomous space that are prototyping and running these vehicles in certain locales, right, in certain cities. I mean, it's happening right now as we speak. And then we're also seeing non-traditional non-traditional automotive organizations and significant technology firms like Huawei and Xiaomi, that are Chinese firms or whatnot, that are investing billions of dollars in self-driving and electric car technologies, right? These folks were not really in the automotive space per se, but now they are investing significant material dollars in this industry, right? Which will just drive innovation, drive newer technologies. So these preferences, all this wonderful technology is going to really drive that consumer input on the macro event as well, where consumers are going to want this, right? And they're going to want this in a vehicle, and most likely it's going to be an electric vehicle. So there's a lot of excitement, a lot of activity in the technology space.
Yeah, and it certainly echoes and supports that the new box here on on new entrants, right? I mean, it's not just new entrants for products; it's entirely new players that never were in the automotive space are now entering in and disrupting that entire sort of supplier ecosystem, right? They're now inserting themselves into different areas, and so I think that to Peter's point, that's going to continue to grow over time, and eventually there'll be some consolidation and mergers and partnerships and things, which we see a lot of that going on as well. So I think this should be open with your dialogue box, if that's right, and just the question there, and we can go through these at the end, is just what is the key theme you feel you'll have the most impact on the EV industry? And this was really the unpacking of the circles around the wheel: consumer, OEM commitment, government, environment, new entrants, and technology.
Take a second and answer your question, or you may already have answered that. Okay, we're going to jump into the next section, which is really the micro impacts. If you're a supplier in the automotive industry, what do these macro indicators tell me, or what should I be looking at? What should I be doing? Well, this is a quote from Albert Einstein that I think really is something that we should, or mantra for the automotive supply base. We cannot solve our problems with this, the same thinking we used when we created them. Meaning that the industry was really driven by the mandates of not even the consumers, but of the OEMs, right? So if we're in the automotive supply chain today, right, there's a certain level of protocol and how we run business, right? That whole protocol is being disrupted as we speak. And we need to think differently, right? We can't think like we used to think. And we got to think differently of how we're going to handle these challenges and grow and grow and enhance our business. So let's talk about the future component landscape. So when we look at components, we think of them as groupings or component groupings. So we have ICE component groupings, internal combustion engine component groupings. We have folks that make exhaust systems, fuel systems, transmission components. The demand for those items are going to continue to level and drop over the next 15 years. We know that ICE is not going to disappear for a number of different reasons, right? There's always going to be a need for combustion engines. I like to use the example, which you don't hear a lot of, but stock car racing, right? I don't see that transferring to electrification in the near term. It may be a new racing industry racing group will come out definitely for EVs. That's going to be pretty interesting. But stock car and whatnot are probably not going to change, meaning that there's always going to be a need and a demand for enhanced systems. Then there's shared groupings of components, and this is where we look at components that can be used on both ICE platforms and EV platforms, right? So electronic sensors and advanced driver assistance systems and infotainment, well, that should persist, right? I mean, I just love getting new technology in my vehicle, and just the great work that these firms and enterprises are doing around modern technology is applicable to the ICE platform, right? So those are going to be used in growth. So if you're in this space, this is a big growth space for folks in the industry, right? Everything electronics is definitely going to continue to grow. Braking systems, right, are going to continue to grow. The interiors of the vehicle are obviously going to continue to grow. I saw some data points actually today on driver suspension. Driver suspension components are going to continue to grow because what are we going to focus on now? The engine, which we did a lot of focus on historically. Well, we're going to do even double down and do more focus on the suspension. Obviously electric powertrain, but suspension systems as well, right, for the electric powertrain. How can we get the smoothest, best ride for our vehicles? So we're going to continue to see growth there. And then the EV dedicated, areas, which the majority of the members of EDTA, focus on, the HV batteries, the fuel cells, the electric drivetrain, definitely the biggest area of growth and investment that we're seeing come at us from a future landscape perspective. So here's the grouping. So you kind of need to gauge where you sit and where you're at. We are seeing some good diversification across the tiers on companies looking to, kind of blend and get in focus on outside of ICE, which is very good and healthy. So we are seeing that, but these are areas that we need to focus on as individual companies within the supply chain. So one thing that is going to be paramount and for the future of the industry is all about supplier, and it's all about partnering. We'll just call it partnering, right? As we've seen the Magna and LG Electronics forming the LG Magna e-powertrain joint venture. We're the gentleman, one of the co-founders, JB Straubel of Tesla, founded the Redwood Materials, and they're partnering with Proterra, an EV OEM, to supply a continuous or contiguous battery platform, meaning that the battery in these vehicles end of life is going to go right through a recycle supply chain with Redwood. And what Redwood does, if you're not aware, is they basically collect all the different types of lithium-ion batteries that are out there. They could be in camera batteries, phone batteries, computer batteries, whatever, appliance batteries, whatever you have. They take those that are being recycled and thrown out, and they basically crack them open and they mine the the materials and the minerals that are in them, because those minerals can be reused for perpetuity, right? They just need to be repurposed, re-energized, and that's the purpose of Redwood. A lot of very good use case and information out there to review, but innovative platform, because in the end, it's going to be a lot more effective and affordable to process and recycle these components than it is to mine them from the earth, right? So that's where Redwood's vision and focus is. We're seeing partnerships with firms like EVgo, who makes charging stations, and Meyer, which is a basically a grocery store, department store business, definitely throughout the Midwest and expanding. But we're seeing them, partner with EV Go, so that there'll be charging stations in the parking lot, right? So that's an area we're going to see a lot of that, right? I mentioned Kroger and Target and wherever you're going to restaurant chains and whatnot. You're going to start seeing them. You see them today. You're going to see EV charging stations wherever you go. So when you go and enjoy a good meal, you'll have an EV station to charge your vehicle. And then in the traditional supply chain, we're seeing leaders such as AAM, American Axle Manufacturing, partner with Innovance Automation on the next generation electric powertrain as well, right? So one of the keys is you're going to see a lot of co-opetition, right? And we truly believe that success in this space is going to be driven driven through partnering, right? So folks that were possibly competition at one point, you're going to probably start seeing them as as partners as we move forward, because we are clearly seeing this at the OEM level. There's no question. Volkswagen and others are partnering. It's just across the board, a lot of activity there. So what does this mean? This means that we need to rethink the supplier business model, right? The supplier tiers are flattening, meaning that there's, as I mentioned, there was this, do business protocol where, OEM work with tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. We're seeing OEM circumvent that rule set where they're going and finding the partner, regardless of where you sit, who can provide them the technology they need to accomplish this objective, right? And we're definitely 100% seeing that in the new EV, the new entrants, the Teslas, the Rivians. Those folks are partnering with people who can provide them a technology regardless of the industry you're in, right? Well, we're seeing this in the domestic OEMs. They're going with their trusted and true suppliers, regardless of where you sit in the supply chain, to partner with. I mentioned supplier partnering, which is absolutely key. OEM governance and operating influence continues to lessen, meaning that sending out the 55 contracts and everyone gets a chance to bid on them, that's going to start disappearing as well, where a lot of those decisions are going to be made just because of good partnering on the front end. Manufacturing agility, absolutely critical. We're going to see a lot more small lots, and lightning fast changeover, a quicker go to market. So being able as a manufacturing company to implement and integrate automation and data so that you can make quicker and faster and better decisions, because you're probably going to be making a lot more products in a lot smaller lots, right? As you look at your manufacturing vision for the future. Shop floor automation is very definitely related to manufacturing agility. You're going to have to be able to mine and understand the data that you're using to run your business, because you're going to need to give answers quickly and effectively, because decisions are going to happen a lot faster than they ever had before. Workforce investment is absolutely critical. We all know that one of our biggest constraints is talent in the workforce. So, we have to augment that with technology, and we have to augment that with investing in people. It's just a different level of skills we're going to need to run efficiently and effectively moving forward. Advanced planning and scheduling, something that a lot of automotive OEMs or automotive folks in the tiers, suppliers in the tiers, haven't really had to invest a lot in historically, because there was a lot of understanding of platforms. Certain platforms going to make X number of vehicles, so essentially you can rough cut plan and figure out what your forecast may look like, right, and execute from that level. That's not going to be the case anymore, especially when you're going to be dealing with a lot more product numbers, not a lot more products, a lot more customers, a lot more folks within your supply chain. You're going to need better advanced planning and scheduling solutions, so you can know how you're going to optimize and run your manufacturing floors more effectively and efficiently. And then consumer preference is going to drive supplier preference. And this is always an area where, well, I've always had a passion around working with our suppliers, but there's folks that want an AAM drivetrain in their vehicle, for example. But we're seeing a lot more of that, where folks are going to want a Yamaha power system, a Mali power system that's for their car, right? Because they're going to be leaders in that space, and they're going to want those. Meaning that suppliers are going to have a lot of influence on who the OEMs are going to select, right? So make your products, market your products, and get in front of these OEMs. And before you know it, you're going to be the leader in that space. So what does this all mean? This all means reinvention, right? Thinking outside the box. And it's, it's a bit, it's a bit fuzzy out there right now. If you're, really 100% dedicated ICE supplier, what are you going to do? Well, you need to step back and reinvent, obviously take baby steps if you're going to get there, but you inevitably need to change, as we know, just from these macro events, that the demand for traditional products are going to start dropping, and some are going to drop more rapidly than others. And we'll talk about a use case here in a minute, which will kind of highlight one of those areas and give you some thoughts on how you could approach. But that's what it's going to come to take, is just a different way of thinking about your business. So this is the next polling question. So hopefully you should have that box still up, and it is, what is the biggest challenge with your business is likely to face from a ICE to EV transition? A, keeping up with shifts in consumer preference. B, supply chain related matters. C, investment dollars for research and development, R&D. D, having the correct workforce in place. E, ability to create the necessary partnerships. And then you have the some of the above, all of the above, none of the above. So if you could take a few seconds and look at that question and answer them, that'd be fantastic. Okay, so what does this all mean? This means realigning your business today for your business of tomorrow. So let's set the stage, right? We have to adapt new leadership roles to focus on the marriage of product innovation and customer needs. We need to learn about collaboration, innovation, and developing. Working with our partners in this space. Speed and integration will always be key. Cascading a culture of nimbleness throughout your enterprise, right? How can we move fast, right? How can we make decisions better? A lot of that, the key to that is data, right? Getting, your understanding what your data is telling you and being able to respond accordingly. Investing in your organization and people, train, reskill, empower, and grow. And then you need to break down the paradigms of false assumptions or false truisms, that things that once perceived as true, we're going to be making, OEM, ICE vehicles aren't going away, and we're going to be making parts for these vehicles forever. We had, a client story where we were going through their business strategy and explaining, this was actually probably now 2 years ago, where we were working with them and talking about the, hey, this EV's upon us, Tesla is starting getting a ton of traction. And our client, who's really 100% focused on ICE, related products, said, yeah, we get that, but we really have 10 to 15 years to, to respond. So I'm not terribly worried about that right now. But thanks for giving us the information. And then he proceeded to tell us, well, by the way, I picked up my new Tesla last night and I love it. It's an amazing vehicle. And so it was kind of like a paradox as we're discussing. Well, that's one less ICE vehicle that probably doesn't have any of your components in it. Point being is that it's happening here, right? Tesla had one of their best quarters ever, right? So vehicles are being purchased, and it's happening. So as we move forward, what does this mean for for the supplier? So what we've done is we've really created 4 forces that impact the supplier of the future. The first being ecosystem expansion, consumerization, rapid design to delivery, and a supply chain for growth. So let's jump into ecosystem expansion. So ecosystem expansion this is all about that relationship which I talked about. This is where you need to really look at what what the OEMs, what the partnerships mean to you. So for example, when you look at these relationships or these we'll call them these competing entities or competing technologies, for example, is how are you going to set your organization to support, or who are you going to pick to align with? Our position is, it's really you're really going to need to be more holistic and supporting multiple or more OEMs that you probably thought you had to. Because a lot of suppliers are dedicated to 1 or 2 or a handful of OEMs, but now we're seeing is that the leading suppliers are expanding their influence, expanding their horizon of customers, are getting involved across these new relationships that are in front of you. So it's really this huge industry expansion today. As Eric mentioned, there's 71 startups. There's the domestics are making EVs. The new entrants are making EVs. So you're seeing this expansion, right? And then what we all know what happens is we continue to expand, and in time there's going to be a consolidation event, right? And that's going to be 10, 15 years. but you need to understand where you fit and where you're going to support that expansion as we move forward. But this is a great opportunity for you to get your feet into the fire here and get involved with the expansion of the industry. Consumerization, and we talked a bit about this, where consumers are going to have preference. Apple Car comes out, everybody's, there's going to be a lot of focus on the Apple Car. Customer expectations are increasing. People are going to want certain looks, features. The whole concept of a whole parking lot full of vehicles at a dealership, and you can have any one of those vehicles as long as it's one that's on our, on our inner showroom or on the parking lot outside. That method's going to change. We truly don't believe dealers are not going to disappear. Dealers are just going to evolve and change and be more service oriented and be more, focused on the customer. We're seeing areas for dealers to be the ones who help customize and configure vehicles to support the customer's preference, right? So that's going to be part of the input as well. But what does this mean? This means, for the suppliers on the call here, this means that you have to be able to react now. This means that you're going to get demand signals for very specific components because Peter wanted something very specific in his vehicle that you're going to have to make for me, right? That's going to fit in that vehicle or support the vehicle or the VIN that's going to go into, right? So, the whole sequencing is going to be to a whole different level as we move forward, based upon consumer preference, not OEM preference of just-in-time manufacturing, which is a whole other issue, but it's going to be focused on, the preference of the consumer. Location also is going to be paramount for customers and consumers, because people are going to, we're seeing a little bit of an exodus from cities and whatnot to expanding out, so people are continuing to spread. So they're going to want to get vehicles delivered to them, ordered through, through the cloud or whatnot. So just a different shift in how consumers are going to have a considerable influence on the downstream of the supply chains for automotive, just based upon what their needs are. We talked about this around rapid product to design. So, this is, we all know it takes years, right? And we've to bring a car or a vehicle, a platform to market, right? Well, that's gonna get expedited. We've already seen, the Tesla has really shrunk that, time to market down considerably. And that's just, from, again, consumer preference, people being able to get vehicles faster. It's going to drive a lot more efficiencies and requirements across the supply chain, that you need to be fast, you need to be flexible, and you need to support. So this just means that you're going to have to be, using, obviously wonderful people to help get this work done, amazing technology and automation to help get it solved on the shop floor. And you need to additive manufacturing is going to start entering as well. Additive printing, additive manufacturing, where you're going to need to be able to prototype something pretty quick, right? And then you're going to have to build a small lot of that. So we're going to see, investments in additive printing, investments in prototyping occur to us as well. And then supply chain for growth, right? So this is just, how we are going to work both upstream and downstream from our supply chain. So we're going to see like such a shift from a static management of information and cascading down through the supply chain to just a dynamic need for managing up to your customers, knowing what your customers' requirements are, and as well as knowing what your suppliers, impacts are. So we use this phrase, supply chain resilience. It's a real deal. We know that we have the chip shortage in front of us. We have the resin situation. We have the pipeline shutdown through cyber vandalism. So there's a lot of these things that are impacting our supply chains, right? The more we can be in tune with these events, that are happening to our supplier, the more effective we're going to be. The great use case is Toyota, right? Toyota does not have a chip shortage because Toyota had the tsunami challenge of 2011, where they had a chip shortage because of the tsunami situation from the area where they, received the majority of their technology, of their silicon wafers. Well, they were not going to have that happen to them again. So they managed that, right? So they created safety stocks and they created processes and backups and whatnot. So they didn't have nearly the issue as a lot of our OEMs do around the chip shortage today, because they had planned for it and they had managed their supply chain for growth. So the point here is, understanding just outside your four walls that you have to extend as we move forward in this new industry.
And I think just another, just one point on this is just, throughout the last, 12 to 16 months, with COVID, I mean, we spent a considerable amount of time, both within automotive as well as outside of automotive, just helping manufacturers with creating that resiliency that other industries were forced to do for as Peter mentioned, tsunami or other events that had happened. And so as these companies have created this resiliency, created these alternative capacity capabilities, whether by having multiple mirrored locations for production and things of that nature, you're going to start to see faster time to market and things of that nature as well. So it's just a secondary data point that it increases the nimbleness by which companies can take things to market, because their supply chain will be more redundant, more resilient, more quicker, more efficient, more players, and so it'll just be a lot more streamlined going forward.
I know we're just doing a quick time check here. So we have one thing we just want to cover real quick on like a real life business example of transition and change, or transformation and action here, of a client impact situation that we ran into. So so this is where it's really important to really manage and know what your OEM's plans are for product lines that you provide goods for. So in this in this case here, we have a client that was looking at acquiring assets regarding, vacuum-based componentry and whatnot. Well, one thing that we noticed is that the OEMs are actually, as I mentioned, that they're looking at components that can be used on both EV and ICE platforms, right, immediately. So one, anything that's like vacuum-based, right, that requires a vacuum, braking systems come to mind. There's some vacuum-based braking systems. Those are those only can be managed through an ICE engine, just the way the engineering technology works. And the EV side is, very little vacuum capability. So we're seeing anything that's a vacuum is being transitioned to electrification, electrified componentry, right? So when you're looking at, in this case, we noticed that the OEM just basically dropped the needs for any type of vacuum-based componentry for near-term platform changes, right? Which hopefully, it shouldn't be a surprise to a lot of folks. So that's a good data point. When you're looking at your components, you need to start looking out and getting in tune with what your OEM, what your customer is going to be doing around systems that they're going to be replacing and that are going to appear in both the EV powertrain as well as the ICE powertrain. So, working with, folks like IHS to determine and review data within your forecasting, really get tuned and do assessments regarding your product, your product lines, and determine what the game plan is for phase out and changeover with your OEMs. Something that we always do, but some of these are happening, like, oh, that's great, we can see it for 3 years. All of a sudden, we're seeing a lot shorter near term. We're going to be done with this in 6 months type situation. So that's something that we wanted to call out to make sure everyone is managing and and taking note of, as well as okay, how are we going to replace those components, and grow our business with the needs, within the industry. So just something to take a note of, and take a look at managing and looking at your forecasting with a fine-tooth comb. Okay, we can we want to go to the last
Yeah.
we might have one. What does this mean, right? So just a real quick summarization here. Consumerization is driving preference, right? It's going to be, people are going to want simplicity in the buying experience. They're going to want to be able to get their products quickly and effectively. Well, that's going to cascade right down the suppliers around this call. Business models are changing rapidly, so being agile and flexible is absolutely key. Don't be afraid of being bold and partnering. Don't be afraid to call on the new OEMs. And we've worked with our clients on that. We have relationships in the space. If you're, how do you get introduced? Just be bold, get out there, get in front, highlight the amazing technology you have and get those conversations rolling. Also, think outside as we're going, there's other, we talk about traditional four-wheel, human transportation. There's a huge industry growing on autonomous vehicles as well that, they move, anything that moves, we can be involved with, right? So don't just, focus on moving people, but moving products and whatnot. And then just robust and responsive supply chain planning capabilities. You need to be really in tune, not only from like quantities and knowing where goods are in process and whatnot, but what's the resilience? What are the impacts? How are your suppliers going to be able to fulfill your needs, right? So we call that the resiliency of the supply chain. So that needs to be factored in as well. So, Eric and I both appreciate taking your time today, and I know we have a few minutes left in here. It looks like we can do a response or a quick review of the folks here. So a handful of folks have EV cars. A lot of folks are an OEM commitment, which is a big influence, as well as consumer preference. Scroll down here to number 3. Some of the biggest changes is keeping up with consumer preference, and a lot of all of the above, which we would expect. So excellent. That's I think here's everything is what we would expect from our observation and working with our existing clientele. So it's there's change. It's coming at us, and we have to just gauge how fast it's going to be coming at us.
Yep, I'd agree. And, hopefully next year when we have this call, we'll see some more EV owners in the future here. We're based on our data, we're going to see that trend go up. So I think that's it's a good data point. So thank you so much for everyone taking the time. I think there's some Q&A here, just a few minutes to go through some questions. So I'll turn it back over to you, Genevieve.
Thank you so much, Peter and Eric. That was a really fascinating presentation, and there's a lot of questions. I know I have a lot of questions, but we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to jump in. If anybody wants from the in the audience wants to post something in the Q&A box, please do so. But I'm just going to start off quickly. Peter and Eric, you mentioned early in the presentation about your work in this last year during the pandemic, about building resilience and alternative capabilities, and just a whole atmosphere within this atmosphere of a changing marketplace. Which pieces of the changes that the pandemic brought do you see as enduring in the market going forward? Like what has changed that we're not going back to?
Well, I can just start. I mean, I think businesses in general have realized that the need to be resilient, the need to be create partnerships to sustain their business, being nimble, being flexible around the workforce. Some of those things, if you didn't have good supply chains or technology or communication protocols, like core business functions that weren't in place pre-COVID, those have been fixed because you didn't survive if you didn't have those in place. You were really, really hurting from a running your business perspective. So we spent a fair bit of time in the first part of COVID doing that. And then the second part, as businesses and we started to recover, we saw more and more of our clients saying, okay, I don't want this to ever happen again. So what do we need to start thinking about? That's where we get into supply chain strategy type discussions, moving, getting into alternative capacity, creating different relationships with partners that could augment supply shortages as needed. These strategies have been deployed, and they're going to continue to be deployed. And I think businesses have realized that things could be done to them at the drop of a dime, when this happened. And I think, now more than ever, I think businesses they're taking a step back, and they're investing in creating that resilient framework, just top to bottom, right? Not just operations, not just leadership, but a culture of change, a culture of nimbleness throughout.
Yeah. And I think just to add on, like from an industry and just like a more of a macro approach, we're going to start seeing a lot more nearshoring, reshoring of operations as well, right? Just through that, we can't afford to have constraints within our supply chain. The whole concept of just-in-time manufacturing is being reinvented because we ran into some considerable issues regarding that. So one thing that's enduring that we're going to see continued growth in is going to be autonomous. Autonomous is going to be upon us sooner than later for a number of reasons.
Well, thank you. And actually, I have lots more questions. Luckily, I know how to find you to ask them. And I would say that's also an option for our audience. I'm going to just, by way of a little bit of housekeeping, this recording will be on YouTube by tomorrow, and you'll get a link helping you to find it. You'll also be hearing directly from the folks at Baker Tilly, who will follow up and be sharing their slides with the audience. That's right, Peter?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. Just want to make sure. Well, I think we are just about out of time. I really thank everyone for joining us at our our Leader Series member showcase. And I look forward to seeing you next month for our summer Leader Series. We'll be sending around more details about that, so stay tuned. And thanks for joining us. I'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.